I'm Robert Poynton of the Innsmouth Gold Club, and my excursion today takes me somewhat further afield than normal because I'm down on the south coast in Plymouth. Now Plymouth, as I'm sure everyone knows, is a naval city. It's a major naval base and has been for hundreds of years, but its history actually goes back way before that. There's Bronze Age settlements in the area, both in Plymouth itself and of course up on Dartmoor, which we're just on the edge of here. So there's a lot of ancient history. The town itself didn't really become a major naval place until the 15th century. But of course, since then, it's seen Francis Drake sail out to take on the Spanish Armada. The Pilgrim Fathers left from here on their voyage to America. There's a lot of English Civil War history here. It was a major base during the Napoleonic Wars, of course, and in fact in 1815, after Waterloo, Napoleon was actually brought here for a short time before he was put out to exile at St Helena. The city was heavily bombed by the Luftwaffe during World War II, and of course today it still remains as a major naval base. Now, with all that history, as we always say on these excursions, comes a lot of folklore, a lot of tales of hauntings and other paranormal activity. In fact, Dartmoor, we could fill, a dozen excursions up myself. There's so many interesting things up on Dartmoor, but we're in mid-December at the moment, and the time of year it is and the current weather conditions, we'd have to mount a major expedition to get to some of the more interesting places. So we shall return to Dartmoor another time. But even within Plymouth itself, particularly the naval bases, there are a lot of interesting stories, and in the surrounding villages there's a lot of sort of mansions and churches that have interesting activity being reported as well. But what we're doing today, we're going to stay in town, in fact just one particular part of town. It's an area that still retains a lot of the old Elizabethan buildings, and it's known as the Barbican. Here we are in the Barbican then. And as I said before, this is the oldest part of Plymouth, at least in terms of existing buildings. In the late 15th century, Plymouth really came into its own as a very important port, and this is where the original harbour was. So some of the streets here still retain their old Elizabethan buildings and their cobblestones in Elizabethan fill. It's quite a miracle really. They survived the Victorian slum clearances, they survived the attempts of the Luftwaffe during the Second World War, and in fact there's over 200 listed buildings in this very small area alone. It's very easy as you walk around these streets to get a sense of walking in the actual footsteps of Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, sea captains, merchants, privateers, smugglers, perhaps even Solomon Kane was here. And we're starting off here at the Elizabethan house in New Street. This was built in 1584 as a captain's house and is believed to be the oldest house in Plymouth. Today it's a museum, but inside they've replicated the actual interior of the time when it was built, and there are a number of paranormal activities that have been reported in this building. In 1983 a local architect was preparing for a lecture. That was around dusk. He went upstairs in the building, and as he was going up the stairs he could hear a knocking sound from up above. When he went into the upper room he saw there was a child's cradle in the room, an old child's cradle that was rocking from side to side. This obviously disturbed him a little bit, so he beat a hasty retreat back down the stairs. The lecture group arrived and he obviously told them what he'd seen and what had happened. So everyone went back up the stairs to check, and the cradle wasn't moving at all. So of course you can imagine the people would maybe have made a bit of fun of him or had a bit of a laugh, but as they did so, the cradle started to rock again. And some people have said that they've seen a child momentarily in the cradle. It's there for a couple of seconds and then it fades away again. Something else that's been reported here is a young girl, aged about 8, sitting in a corner of an upstairs room looking out of the window. She has also been sighted by passers-by who have seen her face from the outside looking down upon the street below. And staff who work here also report the sounds of furniture being dragged around upstairs, but of course when they go up to investigate, nothing has been moved. So yeah, unfortunately the museum is closed today, perhaps due to the current restrictions in operation. But if you do come down, it's really worth a visit. The inside has been restored immaculately. You get a real sense of how the house would have looked in Elizabethan times. Now, it's kind of hard to find a building in this street that doesn't have any story attached to it, so we're just going to quickly talk over a couple of other sites as well. We're outside the Tudor Tea Room at the moment, and the story that comes from here is of an elderly, well-dressed lady seen seated at a table in the corner of the room, who was heard to exclaim quite loudly, "I'm gentry, don't you know," before fading away from sight. So this is now the Cappadocia Turkish restaurant. It used to be known as Shirley Valentine's Tavern. Prior to that, it was known as the Robin Hood Inn, even as far back as 1823. And there's been a couple of strange things happen here. Staff hear footsteps in the upper floors and going up and down the stairs. And there's also a report of people glimpsing just the back of someone's head coming down the stairs, which must be quite disconcerting. Also in the upstairs room, there's been reports of the apparition of a woman standing in a corner. So again, even in a quite small place such as this, quite a large amount of paranormal activity. Just one other strange thing we have noticed, just taking this little side road off of New Street, we actually have a Bigfoot sighting. Take a look. Oh, R2-D2's there as well. So we've just come down the little alleyway, very narrow little alleyway, a couple of houses along from the Elizabethan house, and we've found this amazing area at the back. So the Elizabethan house backs on just over there, and it's an area known as the Elizabethan Garden, and it's a really interesting little space. It's quite a small area, but there's a huge amount packed in here. These gardens were laid out in 1970 as part of the celebrations of the 350th anniversary of the sailing of the Pilgrim Fathers in the Mayflower. And they were laid out in such a way as to reflect the original gardens and how they would have looked in 1620. The gardens then would have been relatively new. Knot gardens were a new thing in Elizabethan times, very popular. And the carving here just above the doorway, that is thought to have come from a property in Blackfriars Lane. So again, that's a very old piece of original carving. So a very interesting little space. It's tucked away again. We've been here a few times but we've never seen this before. But if you are coming here, it's well worth a visit. I don't know if there's any paranormal or ghostly activity as such here, but it really does give you the sense of being in an Elizabethan garden. Now, if you want to find spirits, what a better place to go to than a gin distillery. And we're now outside Blackfriars Distillery. This is the oldest working gin distillery in England. It was established in 1793. Part of this building goes back even further than that though, because this was the site of Blackfriars Dominican monastery. That was built in the early 1300s, and part of that building still survives as the main part of what we see today. Aside from a monastery and a hall, the building has had a number of other uses. It is said that prior to embarking for America, a number of the Pilgrim Fathers stayed here overnight in 1620. It's also been used as a debtor's prison, particularly the lower cellars. Numerous paranormal groups have carried out investigations here and come up with a number of findings. One of the most common reports is about the ladies' restroom. A lot of visitors report a very oppressive feeling in there, and some say, especially the investigation groups, this is due to the fact that a woman was stabbed and murdered there during World War II. I don't know that the murder was ever solved or what records there are of this. The place was hit in the Blitz during World War II and was sort of partly destroyed by fire, so a lot of the records from the actual place were destroyed. But since that, I don't know if there's any way of checking about that murder. But nonetheless, a lot of reports of a very bad feeling around the ladies' restroom. But there's been other things as well. They say that a young girl named Lucy roams the building. There's the ghost of a man called Charles that haunts the still room. And of course, with this being an old priory, there's been sightings of ghostly monks as well. So that concludes our very quick excursion today to Plymouth, and in particular New Street in the Barbican. As I said, there's so much history around here. We've really just covered some aspects of that one particular street. There's other things like the Minerva Tavern, where Francis Drake used to live. That's the oldest pub in Plymouth. Again, a lot of paranormal activity there. And there's just lots of interesting facts. So Charles Darwin sailed from here in the Beagle. And if we link back to our earlier excursion to Kimbolton Castle, Catherine of Aragon would have first set foot on English soil here at the harbour. So a lot of interesting things to see. And we're going to finish our visit here today with a visit to the book cupboard, which is a rare sight these days, a lovely old second-hand bookshop. You used to see loads of them. They seem to be fewer in number these days, but it's always nice to go into a place like this and have a good browse. Who knows what old musty tomes we might discover. And do remember, if you enjoy visiting historic old seaports, come and see us at the Innsmouth Book Club podcast, because every fortnight we take a visit to Innsmouth and discuss our favourite aspects of weird fiction, and also have a chat to some very interesting people. So we hope to see you there. Please like, please subscribe, please share, check out the podcast, and we'll see you next time.